Jack Hayes stood over the shattered gulag, bloodied and unbroken, as freed prisoners roared behind him. Across the stars, fear gripped the Dominion. But what happened next would shake the galaxy to its core. First, let's go back to the beginning. Nobody warned Jack Hayes what would happen when Earth fell. The day the Eric's Dominion descended from the skies, the world ended without a bang, without even a full war. Earth's leaders surrendered in a matter of days, not because they wanted to, but because they understood the math. Against the Erics, there was no winning. Their weapons carved cities into molten craters in seconds. Their soldiers, monstrous and tireless, moved through resistance lines like reapers through wheat. Surrender wasn't cowardice. It was biology, survival instincts overwhelming pride. Jack, once a firefighter in a small Colorado town, didn't have time to be heroic. He had pulled survivors out of a burning hospital during the first attack, a reckless act that drew Dominion attention. To the Erics, leadership, any spark of courage or resilience, was treason, dangerous, infectious. Jack was arrested without a word, shackled with devices that burned his skin when he resisted, and thrown onto a transport ship bound for Gulag 17. Gulag 17 wasn't just a prison. It was a machine designed to crush the human soul. Hidden beneath the jagged surface of a dead moon, it was a labyrinth of freezing tunnels, collapsing mines, and endless work camps. Jack quickly learned the rules. Work until you bled, bleed until you collapsed, collapse, and be left to rot where you fell. There were no trials, no interrogations. The Erics didn't care who you were. Every prisoner was reduced to the same disposable number stamped into a metal collar welded around their neck. The guards were grotesque reminders of the Dominion's cruelty, towering insectoids, their armored shells glistening under the cold artificial lights, their whips hissing with acid that left permanent scars. They called the humans meat units to their faces, laughing in a shrill, clicking language when someone begged for water or mercy. Jack stopped asking questions the first week. There was no humanity here, only obedience and decay. He felt hatred blossom in his chest, pure and scorching, more potent than any anger he'd known on Earth. It kept him breathing when exhaustion said, "Stop." It kept him standing when others fell around him, their hollow eyes meeting his with silent apologies. Every death hardened Jack into something new, something ruthless. He learned to move without drawing attention, to ration his strength, to ignore the pain gnawing at his bones like rats. In a world designed to strip you down to nothing, survival became the only act of rebellion left. Jack didn't just want to escape. He wanted revenge. Patient, complete, and merciless. Each time the guards barked their orders, each time he saw another human die nameless and forgotten, he sharpened the blade inside himself a little more. One day, Jack promised in the darkest corners of his mind, they'll remember what it means to fear a human. And he would be the first lesson. The Erics made a mistake, a small one by their standards, a glitch in the perimeter shielding during an asteroid storm. But it was enough. In Gulag 17, even a whisper of weakness became a weapon. Jack Hayes felt it the moment the lights stuttered and the automated sentry towers fell silent for half a heartbeat. The guards hesitated, scanning the darkened corners of the yard. That hesitation was their first and final error. Jack didn't wait for permission. He moved with lethal clarity, grabbing Ben Carter and Mason Reed, two inmates tough enough to follow orders without asking why. They triggered a fight in the mess hall, loud, chaotic, bloody, smashing trays against tables, throwing themselves at the guards like starving wolves. Screams filled the tunnels, drowning out the shriek of klaxons as the Erics scrambled to respond. It wasn't about winning. It was about chaos. And chaos was freedom's twin. In the confusion, Jack led his chosen handful, 6 men and 1 woman named Ellie Ward, a medic with a broken wrist and fire in her eyes, toward the maintenance shafts. The tunnels were never meant for human passage, narrow, jagged, crammed with toxic pipes leaking vapor that burned their throats raw. But Jack pushed them onward, dragging half-conscious bodies when he had to, shoving others ahead of him with curses and hoarse promises. Drones deployed faster than he anticipated. Small metallic things that whirred like locusts, scanning with piercing beams that cut flesh like scalpels. Mason caught a blast across his back, crumpling silently. Jack didn't look back. Grief could wait. Survival couldn't. Hours blurred into frozen agony. They staggered across a wasteland of jagged rock and biting winds, so cold it clawed at their lungs. Every step was a battle against collapse. Hunger gnawed at their minds. Thirst thickened their blood to sludge. The only thing keeping them upright was Jack's sheer, brutal will. When they finally stumbled upon the smuggler's ship, half buried under centuries of dust, its hull rusted but intact, it felt like an hallucination. Jack didn't care. They pried open the hatch with bare, bleeding hands and dragged themselves inside. The engines screamed when they powered up, an ancient defiance against the vacuum. Jack wrestled the manual controls, every bone in his body screaming in protest as the ship lurched free of the dead moon's grip. For a moment, weightlessness wrapped around him like a promise. He should have felt victorious. Instead, dread coiled in his gut. From orbit, he saw it. Transmission relays stretching across the surface like a spider's web, connecting hundreds, maybe thousands, of gulag facilities just like 17. Each one filled with faces like his. Each one waiting for a miracle that wasn't coming. Jack's fists tightened around the controls until his knuckles bled. Escape was no longer the finish line. It was only the beginning, and freedom, real freedom, would demand a far higher price than he had ever imagined. Word of Jack Hayes's escape didn't crawl across the stars. It roared. Among the scattered human colonies, where survival meant bowing lower every day, Jack became a whisper of something ancient and dangerous. To the beaten, he was a myth. To the broken, a ghost of what they used to be. But to the Eric's Dominion, he was far worse, a living, breathing challenge to their invincibility. They understood too late that Jack was not just a man anymore. He was an idea, and ideas were far harder to kill. Jack didn't vanish into the shadows like they expected. He refused to cower, refused to wait for death behind some hidden moon. Instead, he turned their own technology against them. On a stolen transmission array, barely holding together with frayed wires and repurposed parts, Jack hacked into the Dominion's secured broadcast frequencies, the ones they used to declare new laws, announce new punishments, flaunt their unbreakable grip over a conquered galaxy. Jack's voice cut through their propaganda like a blade. "We are not your cattle. We are not your slaves. We are human. And we will not kneel." Every word struck like a hammer against a wall of fear generations in the making. The Erics reacted with the only language they knew: terror. Within hours, Black Flag operations rolled across the settlements. Whole families were dragged into the streets. Cities that had submitted without a whisper during the invasion were burned as examples. Names were erased from public records. Compliance became the new gospel, preached with shock batons and mass graves. It almost broke him. Jack watched the horror spread through his stolen screens, every fresh massacre a weight pressing down on his soul. Rage clawed at him, but so did guilt. Every life lost because they dared to hope, because they had believed in him. But instead of dying, something else happened, something the Dominion never anticipated. Hope caught fire. Across the colonies, humans who had spent years surviving in silence began to speak again. Smuggled graffiti sprayed across walls. "We are not cattle. Underground networks sprang up, moving weapons, food, and whispers of Jack's name. Even among the subjugated alien species, the Vishari, the Creel, the forgotten castes the Erics had ground into dust, eyes began to lift. No one cared that they were poorly armed or outnumbered 100 to 1. No one cared that rebellion meant death. Hope didn't care about odds. Jack Hayes, once nothing more than a broken prisoner with bleeding hands and a burning heart, had become something the Dominion couldn't whip or cage. He had become the face of a revolution, and the galaxy was finally remembering how to fight back. The final battle came sooner than Jack Hayes had imagined, faster than he wanted. But revolution never obeyed plans. It answered only to the momentum of fury, grief, and hope combined. Gulag 17, the birthplace of Jack's rage, stood like a scar across the barren moon. Its fortifications thicker now, its sentry cannons humming with lethal readiness. The Erics had turned it into a fortress of fear, believing more concrete, more guns, and more blood would erase the stain Jack's escape had left on their empire. They didn't understand. The stain had already become a wildfire. Jack's army was a jagged thing. No polished uniforms, no grand tactics. It was a mosaic of survivors, miners wielding repurposed drills, escaped prisoners carrying dented rifles, even defectors from alien races the Erics had enslaved. They had no right to win by any logical standard. But logic had nothing to do with it. When Jack gave the signal, they struck with a violence born not of hatred alone, but of memory, of every lash across the back, every name stripped away, every child executed for defiance. Explosions shattered the outer walls like cracking ice. Fighters screamed across the battlefield with homemade battle cries, drowning out the shrieking alarms. Jack didn't stay behind the lines. He fought at the front, his hands raw from tearing open cell doors, his voice hoarse from shouting orders over the chaos. He wrenched the weak and dying from their shackles, pressed scavenged weapons into trembling hands, and said the only words that mattered. "You're free. Fight if you want it to stay that way." And they did. The prisoners poured out like a flood, overwhelming the Eric's guards, who had never been trained for an enemy that refused to be afraid. The ground turned slick with alien ichor and human blood alike, but Jack pushed forward, each step hammering into the bones of the Dominion he hated. When the Eric's commanders were dragged from their fortified bunkers, Jack didn't order executions. He lined them up before the freed prisoners and made them see the faces they had tried to erase. No guns, no speeches, just the terrible, silent weight of justice. When the battle smoke finally thinned, Gulag 17 lay in ruins. Jack stood atop the shattered central tower, battered, bloodied, unbroken. He activated the same broadcast system he had once hacked, now repurposed to serve a different master. Truth. Staring into the camera, into the endless void of space where oppressed eyes watched and waited, Jack spoke. "Today, we showed them what it means to be human." His voice was raw, but it carried across the stars like a thunderclap, a signal fire that no empire could ever extinguish. The chains had broken, and the galaxy would never forget who lit the match.